Joined by a few of the more familiar Copites too, so make sure you get involved. This is Anfield, Monday nights at 9 o'clock, only on LFC TV. Billy Liddell, the mere mention of his name is enough to send Liverpoolians of a certain vintage into dewy-eyed reminiscences of a bygone football age. An era of post-war austerity and innocence, virtually barren in terms of honours won, but heaving with 1,000,001 magical memories, the majority of which centred around a player deemed so good they named the team after him. Hello and welcome to Liddellpool, a 90-minute celebration of the legend who carried the Kop. I'm Matt Critchley, and joining me in the studio for this nostalgic trip down memory lane are three men whose lives have each been touched by the great man. A warm welcome to the show for Ian Callaghan, Liverpool's all-time record appearance holder, who replaced Liddell on his debut way back in April 1960. Hello as well to John Keith, author of Liddell's biography, and last but by no means least, local historian Frank Carlisle, a lifelong Reds fanatic. We're talking about one of the all-time great Liverpool players here, aren't we, Ian?
Well, that was a singled out, Matt. You know, I mean, I think I was 12, 13 when I first saw Billy Liddell play, first professional game, went to Anfield, and, you know, I mean, just the anticipation when he got the ball, and people were, you know, just wondering what he's going to do, take people on, shoot, and it was just awesome, it really was. And that's the reason I became a Liverpool supporter, really.
Was he your hero then as a child?
He was, yes, you know, idol, yeah, whatever you want to call him, yeah. And then eventually I signed for Liverpool, and as an amateur, signed professional, and then took over from the great man. Met him and took over from him. Yeah.
John, for some of our younger viewers, tell us just how special Billy Liddell was.
It's a very difficult question, Matt. It's so hard to quantify the greatness of Billy Liddell, especially in today's era when we have people dubbed stars when they're far from it. But this man, especially in the critical wilderness years of the mid-1950s, he carried the club on his shoulders. That's the greatness of the man, and particularly the season after they were relegated, Billy scored 30 league goals in the old second division. They finished 11th, the lowest in their history. But for his goals, they could well have gone into the old third division, and goodness knows where Liverpool would have gone to. So for that alone, his greatness is just, well, it's just magnificent. He was a magnificent servant, and his loyalty was, well, it was just beyond question from the day he joined to the day he left.
Frank, how would you describe the man?
Well, you've only got to, you know, even today, you talk to people, and whether the kids are grown-ups or whatever, they always mention Billy Liddell. You know, I watch LFC TV, and you get these lads, you know, picking the dream team, for example, and, you know, they say to me, you know, why didn't he pick Billy Liddell? Why didn't he pick Billy Liddell? Billy Liddell always gets mentioned, and, you know, okay, you know, he's a past player, but in today's climate, you know, he's still mentioned. And, you know, I've got great memories of Billy Liddell, albeit I was a very small chap.
He would make it into anyone's dream team there on that left-hand side, wouldn't he?
Yeah.
Anyone who saw him play, at least.
Absolutely, you know, these people, because the very first time I actually seen Billy Liddell, it was a game, and it was under floodlights, and I always went into the boys' pen with our Stevie. He was 4 years older than me. And I went this day with my little mate at the time, was Peter Bacino, and we decided to go from the boys' pen right into the ground, you know, at 3/4 time. So we went in, and I was in awe, you know, this ground was on top of me now. So went over, went by a barrier. Peter was like a little monkey, he jumped on the barrier, and this fella picked me up and put me on the barrier. And Billy Liddell actually scored a goal, and the ball was coming towards me, and I had a pair of wellies on, and it turned out, and I was hanging, you know, by me welly, you know, upside down on this bar, you know, and the fella picked me up, and needless to say, I never sat on a bar again in my life, you know. But that was my very first memory of the great man, Billy Liddell.
Do you think he can be compared to anyone since Billy Liddell? Indeed, anyone from perhaps the modern game? Ian, is there anyone quite like him?
I think it's very difficult to compare, really, Matt. You know, as I say, I saw him at a very early age, and you know, it was just he's such a strong player, and you know, I mean, the balls in them days and the pitches and everything else, and you know, the way this guy hit the ball and you know, I mean, he'd knock goalkeepers out, and you know, he was just a balanced player. You know, you see pictures of him today, there's one up there now, and it looks so balanced, you know, and what a great, great player.
Did he have everything? Was there any weakness to his game, John?
Well, there wasn't, because he was two-footed, he could head a ball fantastically well, he played in every outfield position. In fact, in a game at Derby, Tommy Younger got injured, and they had a toss-up who would go in goal, and Billy Liddell won or lost the toss, however you want to say it, to go in goal, but they wouldn't let him go in goal. Ronnie Moran said, "You're not going in goal, you've got to play out. We can't have you in goal because you're our best player by a street." So that would have completed every department had he gone in goal, but I'm sure if he had it, he'd been superb. I mean, there's a classic game at Everton, which I think we're going to talk about later, in the FA Cup, when Liverpool in the second division beat Everton, who were in the first division, 4-0. Sensational result. Billy ended up playing left half because of injuries, but he was magnificent. He was magnificent wherever he played. One of my colleagues once came out with a lovely quote saying that he ran down the wing like an unstoppable red fire engine. And the most recent player I could compare with him as a winger, purely as a winger, would be Andrei Kanchelskis. This powerful run, as Ian said, very balanced, venomous shot. He reminded me of Billy when he was at his peak, but of course Billy played everywhere too, centre forward, inside forward, wherever he was asked to play, he played. He played left back as well in certain games. He was just a fantastic player. Bob Paisley, the great Bob Paisley, used to, like Ian's just said, it's difficult to make comparisons. Bob said comparisons are odious, but he said in Billy Liddell's case, I would make an exception. He said he would be priceless in any era he played. And what we have to can't forget, of course, is that he was a part-time professional, training twice a week. I mean, it's almost too Roy of the Roverish to be Roy of the Roverish, but it's all true. He was Roy of the Rovers.
Fantastic player. We'll be discussing Billy's career at length later in the show, but first, let's take you back to where it all began for our hero and where a campaign is underway to ensure he's never forgotten. Jake Hargreaves reports.
Welcome to Town Hill, a small village just 2 miles away from Dunfermline. It's also the birthplace and home for 16 years of the great Billy Liddell.
Billy was born on January the 10th, 1922, and it was here in this house that he spent the majority of his childhood. The son of a miner, he was the eldest of 6 children.
This is where Billy Liddell's from.
Yeah.
What would still be here from the time when Billy lived here?
Well, when Billy was here, this street would be very similar to how it is today. There'd be 1 or 2 changes that you would notice, especially the shopping area here.
Billy would have been into his football even at an early age. Where was the football pitches? Was this?
Well, Billy played football from childhood, from primary school. The primary school is just down the road here, and across from that would be where he played football in the what is now the Billy Liddell Sports Complex. When he left primary school here in Town Hill, he would have to go to high school in Dunfermline, and because Billy was an intelligent guy, he went to Dunfermline High School, where, like most schools of that ilk at that time, they played rugby rather than football. And as it turned out,
that must have been great for him.
Well, he was a really good rugby player. He played for the school rugby team, and the PE sports teacher wanted him to concentrate on rugby rather than football. And but Billy, well, sometimes he would play for the school rugby team in the morning, come home, get his football boots, and then go and play football in the afternoon. He just loved playing football.
Billy's first footballing love was his local side, Dunfermline Athletic, and it was here at East End Park that he used to come and watch his heroes and marvel at the skills of opposition players, such as Celtic goal-scoring machine Jimmy McGorry and the wee blue devil of Rangers Alan Morton, players that he wanted to emulate. After a successful schoolboy career, Billy first played for Kingseat Juniors, but it was to be here on this very pitch, playing for Lochgelly Violet, that he was to really make a name for himself.
I was born in Lochgelly, and my grandfather was on the committee of Lochgelly Violet, and Billy obviously, that was one of the teams, I think the first team or whatever, near enough that he started out playing for. He used to travel from Town Hall to Lochgelly.
He would get the tram down to Dunfermline and then another tram into Lochgelly, which would have probably taken him about an hour to get there, play his football and then come back again.
He was very proud of Lochgelly Violet. I can remember that. My grandfather, you know, he was very proud of the set-up and the players, and he spoke very passionately of the team, and I'm sure Billy Liddell would have been one of his heroes. Although they weren't a semi-professional team at that time or whatever, they would have had some good players, and it would have been difficult to get a game for them, that's for sure.
It wasn't long before the scouts came flocking to see Billy, and on the recommendation of the then Reds captain Matt Busby, Liverpool signed him for just £175. Little did the club realise, they'd just secured arguably the greatest bargain of all time.
Over 70 years have now passed since Billy headed south to start a new life at Anfield, but he'll never be forgotten in his native Town Hill, and a campaign is now well underway to ensure a permanent memorial is built in his honour.
I'm the local councillor for this area for Town Hill, and one of my constituents had been at a funeral, as it happens, with some Liverpool people, and they said, "Where are you from?" And he said, "Town Hill," and they said, "Well, that's where Billy Liddell's from." And you know, then went on to talk about why he hadn't been recognised in his hometown, and he got in touch with me, and then I took it from there.
We started a petition with our newspaper, and it gathered, you know, great support from all over the world, from this area, from Liverpool, and from football fans right across the world.
I've been a Liverpool supporter for a number of years, and I was obviously aware of Billy Liddell when I was elected into the Parliament last year. And one thing, being in the Parliament, you're able to try and make things happen in the local community. And I've been speaking to some people locally, and we knew it was an issue that we wanted to promote and push on the agenda. So I decided to put a motion down in Parliament calling for a memorial.
Gallery, we're now on to petition 1172, and it's by Bill McCulloch. I welcome Bill to the meeting this afternoon on behalf of the Billy Liddell Memorial Campaign, calling on the Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to consider what support and assistance can be provided to local authorities to erect lasting memorials to local sporting legends.
That generated some media coverage, which generated some support in the local community, and really the Billy Liddell Memorial Campaign is a grassroots campaign, lots of local people, and it's just really shot up in the last few months, and I've been happy to support their activity, and it's starting to make a difference already.
Reading up about Billy, I think that's a wonderful guy who had time for everybody, did a lot of charity work, a great role model for modern day young people, where they see like superstar footballers who earn millions and millions of pounds and won't talk to anybody, no time for the fans, and Billy Liddell was the opposite.
Small communities can take great strength and from heroes of the past, and as I said, the young people growing up playing football must act as a great inspiration to them, to know that someone from a small village like this can make it right to the top of one of the world's greatest football teams.
I used to play football in the Town Hill area, and only really became aware of Billy Liddell when I was getting a little bit older. What we are aiming to do now, when I was playing football 7 or 8 year old in that area, what we're aiming to do now is the 7, 8 year old, 9 year old boys and girls that are going to play football there recognise who Billy Liddell is, recognise what a successful club that he played for and the part that he played in that, and also recognise that, you know, that we should celebrate people's achievements, and we shouldn't be shy about doing that.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
So
Welcome.
This is the fields Billy Liddell played on?
Yes.
Yeah, and I see already you
We've got a poster up that's "Welcome to the Bill Liddell Friday Night Football. There are no strangers here, just friends that haven't met yet." And it's open to all the kids in this area, Town Hill, Bill Yeoman area, and even some high school kids. You'd just like to come in.
Yeah, brilliant. How interested have the kids been in Billy Liddell in general?
It's phenomenal. We've got some posters up here. This is designs that the kids have been making up with regards to Billy, and more at a personal level, with regards to the idea of badges and things like this, what Billy done, played football, and different ideas, the concept being play football, friendship, and different things. And we've got my Welcome to Anfield poster.
Why do you think it's so important that someone like Billy is never forgotten in a village like this?
Well, I would, being typical Scots, we build people up to knock them down. But I think somebody like Billy, outstanding football player, outstanding person, his morals, his ethics and the way he conducted himself, it's a fantastic role model to turn down to the kids and say, well, here's someone that if it was today, it would be an absolutely outstanding player. It could be Steven Gerrard or Jimmy Carragher, somebody like that, somebody that they can recognise and say, I want to be like that.
Is that what you have to tell the kids? You have to explain it in that sort of terms? Say, Billy Liddell, he was the Gerrard of his time.
Yes, yes, definitely, yes.
There's no sort of official recognition, although that's something that we're doing something about. We're going to rename the local football pitches in Town Hill Sports Complex after Billy Liddell, and we're hoping that that'll be done by the end of this year or early next year. So that's a first step in taking the campaign forward. But what we're working on now is a community garden which will be dedicated to Billy Liddell, with a memorial in the form of a cairn with a plaque on that, and that will be hopefully done by early April or May next year.
It really is a fitting tribute. I don't think people are really proud of what Billy Liddell achieved. The people on the committee are really proud of what we achieved. What we're trying to do now is make more people proud of what Billy Liddell achieved. And the fitting tribute is about how we remember him, and how we remember him, also what we achieve in his memory going forward. And I think that is, if we manage to encourage a new generation of people, young people coming through schools to take an interest in football, perhaps look at it as a career, but use football as a force for good in the local area, I think that will be the fitting tribute to Billy's memory.
Ian, fantastic little piece that. It's fantastic as well that the Billy Liddell Memorial Campaign has started and are going. The people deserve a lot of credit, don't they?
Oh, very much so. And, every accolade Billy received when he was alive, and now when he's, years later, he deserves every one of them. And it's fantastic to see people of his village remember him, and what a great player he was, and the person he was, It wasn't just a great footballer. As they said, he was a great man. He was quiet, he was a strong person, religious person, but a terrific person himself, he really was.
Remembered so fondly around Liverpool, of course, Frank, for the plaque at Anfield as well, but important that he's remembered in his hometown, the place he grew up.
Well, yeah, because, that surprised me, actually, because, there's people, small village, and yet they've got Liddellpool up. The name and Liverpool, and so Liverpool's not forgotten there, because the greatest accolade that this man could have was our own football club, being nicknamed after him, Liddellpool. That's the greatest of all accolades anyone could achieve, even Steven Gerrard today, So therefore, these people up there in his little village, they want this memorial, and it's gone to their Scottish Parliament, to be even named in a Scottish Parliament. Yeah, let's get this thing done. It's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, great to see the kids as well getting involved as well.
Well, yeah, we've seen the paintings, and John Keith went like that. Isn't that brilliant? So it does. It affects us, it really does. Shall we twin the Liverpool and
Town Hill?
Yeah.
They'd do well out of that, wouldn't they? John, let's get back to Billy's career. How much do we know about how he actually arrived at Liverpool? We heard in the film there it was Lochgelly Violet, who obviously I'm not sure are around now. They're certainly not in the Scottish divisions
sadly,
now.
So I gather. No, I gather there is a Lochgelly club, but it's not Lochgelly Violet anymore. Well, he was playing for Lochgelly Violet, and because he obviously was a great rising talent, a lot of clubs were on his trail, and perchance Matt Busby, who was then Liverpool captain, was on a golfing break in that area and was told about this young protege of Logelli Violet, and he immediately telephoned Liverpool, the manager George Kay, to say, look, you better get this sorted out, or this guy is going to be a great player. And the next thing was Liverpool were up knocking at his door to speak to his parents, and they managed to get him, as you said, for £175, which was, well, I mean, it is the greatest buy of all time, without a doubt.
And put that into context, though. How much was £175 sort of roughly worth back in 1938?
5,000 would it be? I don't know. Like I mean, you could say the best bargain of all was Kenny Dalglish, who they sold Kevin Keegan for 500. And they paid £440 for Kenny, so they made 60 grand and got Kenny Dalglish. So I suppose the argument is that it wasn't, but the point I'm making is it was a fantastic piece of business to get Billy Liddell for even in the value of those days, £175, because what he gave to that club is beyond, you can't quantify it. As I said earlier, for him to be instrumental in keeping them out of the old third division is probably his greatest achievement, even greater than the championship win in '47, because had they gone down then, with the type of board there was at Liverpool, who were not enterprising, who were watching the pennies when they didn't have to, because the gates were big, they could have plummeted all the way. Liverpool could have been also rans instead of the great club they are today.
George Kay, the manager, of course,
yes,
when Billy signed, how instrumental do you think he was in bringing him to the club?
Well, I think he accepted Matt Busby's word. He hadn't seen him, but Matt said, look, this guy is raising eyebrows all around Scotland. We've got to get him, because Matt, of course, was quite a well, he was a very loyal Liverpool servant himself, captain of the club, and he wanted the club to get the best players, and he knew that Billy was going to be a great player, which he was. And sadly, of course, like Bob Paisley, who signed just after him, the war took 7 years out of their careers, and you know, he might well have won a lot more had the war not intervened.
Slightly ironic, Ian, I suppose, in a way, that it was Matt Busby who went on, Liverpool captain, of course, but went on to enjoy success with Manchester United. But it was him who ultimately recommended Billy to Liverpool, and George Kay maybe didn't really even know that much about him.
Well, in fact, if it wouldn't have been for Matt Busby, probably nobody would have known about him. Well, I'm sure the talent he was, but somebody else would have come in and took him. And, you know, only for Matt Busby, you know, it's amazing, really. Only for Matt Busby, Liverpool probably wouldn't have got Billy Liddell.
But even then, Matt, you see, there was another problem. Having knocked on the door and said, we'd like to sign you, Billy's parents, wisely, I'm sure, said, yeah, but we've got to make sure, he wants to be an accountant and we want him to train, so he's not going anywhere unless we can get him a job. So Liverpool then had to talk to their own accountants, a company called Simon, Jude and West, and they agreed to take him on. And it was only on that proviso that Billy's parents let him go south, probably to the heathen south as they saw it. England, you know. They were Scottish Presbyterians, the family, and as Ian said, God-fearing, and they wanted the best for Billy. So there were a few little hurdles to overcome, but of course, well, when he came, it was the start of I think, probably the greatest player Liverpool have ever had.
Do you think it's fair to say that the war robbed him of his best footballing years, Frank?
I think the war robbed not only Billy but other great lads, you know. Matt Busby, for example, you know, he was Liverpool captain. He loved Liverpool, as John said. And yeah, you know, because it did. And as John said again, I'm not reiterating what John has said.
Feel free.
Okay. But what is... I'm not stealing your thunder, aren't you?
Joking.
But the point is, you know, yeah, you know, the war took away, obviously, international caps from the likes of Billy. I think he only won about 28, am I right, lads?
That's right.
You know, so he would have won a lot more, you know. So, yeah, you know, the war, the intervening war periods, you know, took a lot away, not only from Billy Liddell, but a hell of a lot of other players. But the iconic man himself, yeah, you know, it did take away a lot.
John, his debut is a bit of a sort of contentious issue, isn't it really, Billy Liddell? Because he made his debut really almost during the war years, but that wasn't a full league championship campaign, was it? Because
oh no,
the FA
they're not classed as... He played for Scotland during the war, but they're not classed as first-class appearances. The caps aren't recognised, nor are the games. The only thing is that before the league began, the FA Cup began a season earlier, so those games were...
So his official debut was against Chester City then, is that what we're saying?
Yeah, but the league debut was at the start of 46-47,
right,
the season they won the title.
And that was, of course, against Chelsea?
That's right, yeah.
And what a memorable game that was. 7-4, did it finish?
That's right, 7-4, yeah. Yes, indeed. You've been swatting up. You're trying to catch me out.
I'm trying.
It was a strange... I mean, it was the longest season on record ever, because it finished in June, and it was an appalling winter. I mean, listen, I don't remember it before we go any further, but, you know, you can just judge by the number of games postponed. It was the worst winter till the bad one of 62-63, and it went into June, and Liverpool didn't know they'd won the championship, I think, till the last day of May, which is staggering, really. And of course, it was the team of Liddell and Albert Stubbins. They signed Albert Stubbins in quite a dramatic cloak and dagger way. Everton and Liverpool and others were after Albert Stubbins, who was this free-scoring centre-forward of Newcastle. And Liverpool's chairman then, Billy McConnell, went over to an Everton game at Goodison, purely on the pretext that he was seen. But at half-time he left and drove up to Newcastle to sign Albert Stubbins. Everton left after the match, an hour or so behind them, to sign Albert Stubbins. And they both arrived at St James's Park, Everton and Liverpool representatives. And Albert was at a news theatre in Newcastle, and they had to put a message on the screen, would Albert Stubbins please report at St James's Park? And when he got there, he found Everton and Liverpool wanted to sign him. So he said he tossed up over who he would speak to first, and Liverpool won the toss. And once he'd spoken to Liverpool, he decided, without even speaking to Everton, that he was going to become a Liverpool player. And that cost £12,500, which was then obviously Liverpool's record fee, and a lot of money in anybody's language at that time. But he was a great centre-forward, and Liddell used to provide the service. And they had Jack Barmer, the mustachioed inside forward, and he scored a lot of goals. 3 consecutive hat-tricks, of course, which is a record, in successive league games. So they were a formidable side, there's no question about that, in that era, and they won the title.
Yeah, Liverpool champions, of course, in 46-47. Amazing to look back now and think Billy Liddell only really won one major honour, which was that championship of 46-47.
It is incredible. I'm sat here and, you know, I've got an LFC history lesson from John, so it's just marvellous. And yeah, I mean, when you think of, you know, we've said about the war years, took a lot away from Billy's career, but yeah, I mean, he didn't win an awful lot of medals, and although he played for his country and Great Britain, yeah, of course. But yeah, so I mean, as John said, he was very loyal. Really, he was. I'm sure he could have gone to other clubs, better clubs, bigger clubs, but he was loyal to Liverpool, and that's the type of man he was. I think, you know, I've met him. And he was an honest man and an honest player. When you came across him later in your career, did he ever refer back to that 46-47 season? No, in fact, I didn't. You know, I mean, although I took over from Billy, I didn't sort of, because he was a part-time player, so I didn't see. You know, when I signed full-time, he only came to train a couple of days a week, and so, you know, didn't sort of get to know him very well. And funny enough, I got to know Billy a lot more when I finished playing. And he was chairman of the Spot the Ball panel at Littlewoods. And I actually took over, not only from, you know, at Liverpool, I took over as chairman on the Spot the Ball panel from Billy. So I took over twice from Billy. And very different I mean, it's unbelievable, you know, and God, I'm so honoured, I really am. But, you know, I didn't see a great deal of him. I played, I think, once in the reserves with him, maybe twice. So that was about it. Yeah. Okay.
You talked about loyalty, Matt, just very quickly. The big demonstration of his loyalty was in 1950, after the FA Cup final they lost to Arsenal. Billy, there's a lot talked about loyalty bonuses, but Billy gave Liverpool a bonus of loyalty because he was they tried to recruit him to join the rebel league in South America, and they were offering thousands of pounds when the maximum wage was £8 a week. And Billy said no. He had young sons, a young family, and even Billy's family doctor tried to persuade him not to go because you know, we can't lose Billy Liddell. And he said, you won't like it. They're the heirs to it, then it'll be bad for your child. But Billy had decided anyway he wasn't going. And given it was a very, there were very hard times in this country after the war. I suppose it was very attractive to go to Colombia and join this rebel league. A lot of others went, a lot of other stars went, but Billy said no, and it's to Liverpool's incredible benefit he didn't go.
OK, time for a quick break, but when we return, 3 members of Billy's family we'll be hearing from, and they'll be sharing some of their intimate memories of him, so don't go away.
Whether you're from Anfield or Adelaide, Bootle or Bangkok, make www.liverpoolfc.tv your first port of call when you hit the web. With all the Anfield news first, goals and highlights on demand, and the chance to interact with supporters from all over the globe, it's got to be the #1 destination for Reds everywhere. www.liverpoolfc.tv.
Whatever your thoughts on the latest Liverpool issues, share them on our interactive show, This is Anfield. Whether it be by phone, email, text or Twitter, you could be interacting with Reds legends and having your views heard by fans across the globe. Every week we're joined by a few of the more familiar Copites too, so make sure you get involved. This is Anfield, Monday nights at 9 o'clock, only on LFC TV.
The KFC Boneless Banquet for one, with 3 mini fillets, popcorn chicken, fries, side and drink. It's fine food without the fuss.
Because heartburn can strike at any time, keep relief close at hand with Gaviscon liquid sachets.
Go, go, go. This lady needs our help and fast. She's suffering from heartburn and needs Gaviscon. She can feel the cooling and soothing already. Good job, lads.
Gaviscon liquid sachets. For liquid relief you can really feel. And when you're travelling light, here's another handy solution. Best friend. Gaviscon Handy Pack. Feel the relief wherever you go.
Never miss an opportunity with new Lynx Bullet. Pocket pulling power.
The official LFC mobile site. The latest news, downloads, goals and highlights, competitions and more. For a free link to the site, UK customers text COP to 61718 or 57402 for Ireland.
Just tired that last few minutes. Even Neil
break
Miller.
through the middle. Harry Kewell's on. Mellor will have a shot.
Yeah!
He's won it! Wow!
Get in!
Liverpool 2, Arsenal 1. Neil Mellor has won it for Liverpool. Incredible save. Welcome back to Liddellpool, the show in which we remember the amazing career of the great Billy Liddell. We were talking before the break, Ian, about how he was only a part-time player. Do you think he would have been even better if he'd have trained 5 days a week, or was he still as good as they get?
He was just a phenomenal man, a phenomenal player, and I think if Billy would have been a full-time professional, he would have been no better than what he was. He was just one of those people who was unbelievably fit, strong, and yeah, he's just the player he was.
How did the other players, and how do you think the other players reacted when he was only really a part-time player? Was he still sort of a part of the side, you feel, a part of the squad?
Oh, very much so. I mean, you know, when you look at the player he was, and you know, I mean, they called it Liddellpool, you know, so he was the best player, even though he was only training, you know, a couple of days a week. So Billy was a phenomenal man and phenomenal player, and I don't think it made any difference that he was part-time.
Frank, why do you think he did choose to keep up with the accountancy, wasn't it, that he was doing the other few days a week? Why did he not decide to go sort of full-time and be a professional full-time?
Well, I think in those days, you know, what you needed, and you get lots of players, you know, ex-players, and I'm going back to his era, as apprenticeships, you know, they had to have something to fall back on. It's not like today, it's totally different than it is today, you know, because they make so much money. I'm not begrudging that, you know, I'm not begrudging the players.
Would he have made more money from his accountancy, do you think, back then?
Well, of course he would have done, because it's a great job, accountancy. I was an accountant today, you know, never going back then, you know, but you needed something to fall back on. And his parents, as John mentioned before, you know, they needed something. They needed a reassurance from LFC that, you know, Billy would have something to fall back on, and why not accountancy?
It's a good job I never did that, you know, Matt, really, because I was serving my time as an apprentice central heating engineer. I was, and then when Mr Shankly decided he wanted to sign me professionally, he came down to the tenements where I lived and saw my mum and dad, and my dad said, well, he's an apprentice, you know, Mr Shankly. He said, well, yeah, but I want him to sign full-time professional. So really, you know, I've been very lucky, really, that I made it as a professional and went on for so long, because I couldn't have fell back on central heating because I didn't know anything about it.
Very honest. Frank, how many of the players back then would have been sort of part-time? Would he have been the only one?
Well, I think the majority of them, to be honest, as Ian said, you know, he was an apprentice. And, you know, this fella's with us today. You know, he plays in one of the greatest of all Liverpool sides ever. You know, so, yeah, you know, they were apprentices, and you needed something to fall back on. So I reckon, I think John will tell you, but I think the majority of the players in Liverpool then where, you know, they had something to fall back on, and yet part-time.
They were all full-time pros, though, apart from Billy. That's the point I think Matt was making. Some of them did have business interests, obviously, family businesses and things. But Billy, as far as I know, in his years at Liverpool, was the only part-timer. But as Ian said, I think people were in awe of Billy anyway. He was so good. And he kept himself fit. He played tennis, he played table tennis. As Ian said too, he looked after himself. He was a very disciplined person. And I think, as regards he was proud to be a professional accountant, as he was to be a professional footballer. And I think he was able to marry the two because he was so good at both. I think that's it. He was good at anything he did, wasn't he?
He was.
This is the point about Billy. I mean, when you think about it, he was launched into the austere post-war years. And this dashing knight of football came racing down the wing and scoring incredible goals. He was just made for the times, really, this colourful character piercing the gloom of post-war Britain. And I have a friend in the BBC who told me a lovely story. He said that his parents were very happily married, but his mother told him once, she said, there's only one man I'd leave home for, and that's Billy Liddell. You know, I mean, he was revered by people. And Evertonian, like Liverpool fans always admired Dixie Dean, Everton fans always admired Billy Liddell because he was somehow above football. He transcended local rivalries and prejudices. He was so good, and again, he was such a gentleman. You know, he was loved by everybody, admired by everybody.
It's well documented, Frank, that he never drank, he never smoked, he never swore. He would have been, I would guessing, fairly alone in those stakes, though, wouldn't he, back then?
Well, yeah, I think John can answer that as well, but...
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. No, but the point is, I was told a little story, whether it's true or not, I just don't know, you know, because of this wonderful man, you know, he became a justice of the peace, and he actually had to give some fella an apologise 3 months. And the fellow went, that's all right, Billy, you know. So whether, you know, it would have been someone different, I wonder what that fella would have said, you know, as he was going away for 3 months. So, yeah, you know, he was a great man. And as John mentioned again, you know, you get the likes of Dixie Dean, who was revered by all the blues still today, you know. And this man also, Billy Liddell, you know, absolutely amazing what this man not only achieved, and the loyalty and the passion and commitment he gave to Liverpool Football Club. That's why he's so fondly remembered, you know, by by all what he did, you know, not just playing football, but everything that he did, whether it was accountancy, whether he was a justice of the peace, or, you know, these other wonderful things that he did.
OK, well, we've established what type of character Billy was, what he was like on the pitch, certainly. But what was he like away from football? We spoke to three people who perhaps know him better than anyone. His son Mal, sister Raina and wife Phyllis.
He was a quiet, gentlemanly type of guy, you know.
Very competitive man, even sort of going up the road to go to the house, he'd always sort of sprint you up the road to see if, you know, we could be, and that sort of went on to around 14, 15.
Well, he was quiet, but he had a wicked sense of humour. Our Wooly, would I say, because it wasn't Bill until he came down here. It's our Wooly.
His parents wouldn't let him come down to Liverpool unless he had a job.
Dad wanted to make sure that, you know, he had an occupation as well as the football, and so he made him go an accountant.
He came as a junior, you know, with an accountant to do the books, and they had a small office, and of course all the girls were a bit, you know, there's a footballer in there, you know. So said, footballer, what's his name? So I said, Billy Liddell. So what a funny name.
Following a courtship that spanned the duration of the war, Phyllis and Billy were eventually married in July 1946. And life as a footballer's wife, even back then, was to have many advantages.
£20 a week was phenomenal, because my uncle, I think, was on the railway and he wasn't getting half that amount of money at the time that Bill was getting 20 quid. And then he got all the little perks, you know, the funny perks. We had a gentleman one time at a match who was giving him a bit of stick, and you got used to it at times, but not a lot. They didn't do it very much. It was quite good, really. They were quite good, the spectators. But of course, this guy got on to him, and I got a bit annoyed, and I said, that's my husband you're speaking about. And he said, oh. And he happened to be a farmer from Tarpley in Cheshire. And every week, home match, there was a half pound of butter, a chicken, and half a dozen eggs. So we did very well, actually.
In 1950, 2 months before the cup final with Arsenal, the Liddell ranks were boosted by the arrival of twin sons David and Malcolm. And while the family grew, so too did Billy's popularity.
You always saw your father as your father, and from a very early age you didn't realise that he was a footballer. And the thing that always sort of reminds me of it was when we used to go to town, there would always be people stopping him in the street and saying, oh, all right, Billy, you're right. And we just sort of accepted this, that they were just people that sort of came up to him. But he was so loved in that city that, you know, it was just, well, he's your dad, but he must know an awful lot of people.
Everybody introduced you as Billy Liddell's sister, you see. And sometimes you'd say, well, but I'm really little, not, you know. But it was great, it was good, because it was known throughout the city.
I was looking on the internet some time back, and there was a guy on the internet saying about being at the same school I was at with my brother, and he likened the fact that waiting to see Billy Liddell come and take his twins away was like the same instance as sort of like David Beckham doing it for his youngsters, you know, going to school. So he's obviously held in that kind of esteem, you know.
It's just so easy going, it didn't really bother him at all. There were times when he did actually win games for them, you know, on the last minute. He never sort of boasted about his achievements, you know, it was just one of those things. There was 11 players in the team, and I mean, he only thought of that. He didn't think he was the only one.
I only sort of realised that the team was named after him because at home we have a memento which was given by two loyal Coppites, and it says, to Billy Liddell, two loyal Coppites, supporters of Liddellpool. So, well, that's a bit strange, you know.
Treated it as a job, and a good job, well done when he'd done it, and that was all.
In those days, there was this loyalty thing, and to play for one club for 25 years, which he did, now it would be unheard of today.
He would never have left Liverpool. There was an occasion when the one club wanted him to go abroad and that, and no, he wouldn't have gone.
I'm just amazed that, you know, sometimes you bump into people in different parts of the country and say, oh yeah, I knew Billy Liddell, yeah. He was a wonderful player. I think, well, yeah, that was my dad, yeah.
Younger people have still heard of him. You know, do you remember Billy Liddell? Well, vaguely, yeah, I've read about it, you know, and so he's still remembered now. And, you know, that's amazing, I think.
All as I can say is he was great. He was a great father, he was a great husband, and a great footballer.
John, great to hear from his wife and his family there. Back on the pitch, 1950, Billy was instrumental, wasn't he, in getting Liverpool to their first FA Cup final down at Wembley?
Well, he was indeed, not only in the games played up to the semi-final, but of course scored a goal in the semi-final against Everton, which probably made it sweeter for Liverpool fans at Main Road, and the great Bob Paisley lobbed the other one over Everton goalkeeper George Burnett. So I suppose they went to Wembley on a great flood of joy from their fans, having knocked out Everton en route.
They formed a fairly lethal partnership down that left-hand side, didn't they, Bob Paisley and Billy?
Absolutely, and you know, the sad thing about you know, that particular game, you know, I do watch it on, I have watched it on film. I wasn't there, you know, I was only 3. No, but the point is, the likes of, it's eluded us, the FA Cup, and you know, I can imagine the fans, especially my family, the older people, you know, the older lads, they were saying, you know, how much, you know, they wanted this FA Cup. And you know, to beat Everton also in the semi-final, and the likes of Bob Paisley scoring, Billy Liddell scoring, you know, they thought it was their year against Arsenal, and you know, it just eluded us, you know. So it was a great disappointment to you know, especially to my family and the rest of the supporters, I suppose. But yeah, you know, it's just a wonderful memory to have the likes of Bob and the wonderful Billy Liddell, you know, scoring, but, you know, unfortunately it's eluded Bob right through his career, didn't he, even the manager, because he was dropped.
Yeah.
And, you know, so it was just an elusive thing until the great man himself came along, Bill Shankly.
Ian, you'd have been a very young man, of course. Do you have any memories of the 1950 FA Cup final?
Not really, only what people have talked about, Matt. Obviously, you know, Billy was singled out, I think, by a guy called Alex Forbes, who almost took Billy out the game. Yeah. And you know, so I've heard people talk about it, but you know, and I know about Bob scoring a goal in the semi-final and being dropped for the final. Really, and that's about all I know. Yeah.
Do you think there was almost a sense of anger about the treatment Billy received during that game? Because it's undoubted that he was almost kicked off the park, wasn't he, John, in some respects?
Well, that may be slightly overdoing it, but he was certainly physically buffeted right through the game by his compatriot, his Scottish compatriot, Alex Forbes, a fiery, red-headed wing half, who clearly was deputed to stop Liddell. And I'm sure there was a lot of anger amongst Liverpool fans, because people over the years were old enough to remember it. Ian and I don't have any clear memories, none of us do. But you know, the acquired wisdom of the day was that he was the referee should have been stronger in dealing with Forbes. And a colleague of mine, Brian Glanville, who was then a young journalist, he wrote that Billy, every time he got done by Forbes, just got up, carried on with the game, never retaliated, which was another one of his incredible traits. But at the end of the game, when he was getting dressed, he couldn't put his jacket on. His shoulder was so badly injured that he couldn't lift his arm to put his jacket on again. So that's how badly he was hurt by Forbes. And clearly, without Billy in full song, Liverpool weren't Liverpool, and I'm told it wasn't a great performance by the team. And of course it was a watershed result, that, because from then on it was on into the wilderness years of the 1950s for Liverpool, and some perilous times, particularly in the season after they were relegated in 54-55, when they were having a bad time even in the second division, and this man came up with 30 league goals, which was quite amazing.
He's a player, Ian, though, that you feel deserved a winner's medal in an FA Cup final, and perhaps he more than anyone would have felt the disappointment really of losing to Arsenal down at Wembley.
Well, yes, I mean, you know, it's everybody would love, I mean, you know, years ago, I mean, to play in an FA Cup final at Wembley was just like the biggest thing in a footballer's career, apart from playing for your country. And, you know, I mean, it would have been fantastic. I mean, I again, you know, going back to 65, I was there, and I know what it means to a player to play at Wembley and win an FA Cup final medal. So Billy missed out, and I would imagine he'd be so disappointed about that, yeah.
Yeah, it's a shame. Well, we'll take another short break now, after which we'll recall how things went from, as John said, bad to worse for Liverpool in the early 50s, but how Billy remained a firm favourite with the fans. We'll see you again in a couple of minutes.
Just tired that last few minutes. Even Neil
break
Miller.
through the middle. Harry Kewell's on. Mellor will have a shot. Yeah! He's won it! Oh! Get in! Liverpool 2, Arsenal 1. Neil Mellor has won it for Liverpool. Incredible save.
I can't seem to make you mine. Kissing around all the time. Can't you see what you're doing to me? You fill my heart with misery, with every breath.
Never miss an opportunity with new Lynx Bullet. Pocket pulling power.
When I was younger, I wasn't interested in food at all. I was interested in eating food, very interested in that. The secret to producing the best food is using the right ingredients. Like this chicken, came in fresh this morning. Well, this is what it's all about, preparing a fresh chicken by hand. Yeah, it's a lot of effort, but if a job's worth doing, it's worth doing well. I guess you could say I've learned a lot working here. KFC. Fresh, on-the-bone chicken, every store, every day.
For the best interviews and inside exclusives, get the official LFC weekly magazine. There's in-depth analysis of every first-team match, comment and debate from club legends, and news and views from every level at Liverpool Football Club. Test your knowledge with our weekly quiz, and keep your eyes peeled for the Cop Idol hidden on the back cover. LFC is the Premier League's only official weekly magazine, in the shops every Tuesday.
Whether you're from Anfield or Adelaide, Bootle or Bangkok, make www.liverpoolfc.tv your first port of call when you hit the web. With all the Anfield news first, goals and highlights on demand, and the chance to interact with supporters from all over the globe, it's got to be the #1 destination for Reds everywhere. www.liverpoolfc.tv.
Relive the greatest goals and the classic matches from the Reds Premier League campaigns right here on LFC TV.
That is terrific! What a goal!
From McManaman to Gerrard and Owen to Crouch, we'll take you on an action-packed journey through Liverpool's Premier League years.
What a way to finish off a game!
You're watching Liddellpool, LFC TV's special tribute to the legendary Billy Liddell. As those who followed the club at the time will be only too aware, Liverpool's fortunes dipped alarmingly after the first Wembley appearance back in 1950, culminating in the unthinkable relegation to Division 2 4 years later. Liverpool could have been relegated the year before, though, couldn't they? Because I think they survived on the last day of the 52-53 season.
That's right.
So things were obviously a fairly big downward spiral after that.
Well, they were. Well, what had happened after the FA Cup final in 1950, a year later, George Kay died. George Kay left the club, and he was ill, and he died subsequently after. Don Welch came in as manager, and But there was a certain reluctance by the club to invest in players, and when Peter Robinson came 15 years later, they found this minute of a board meeting that said we are not to spend more than £10,000 on any player. Well, that really governs who you can buy and the quality of players you could buy. They'd spent 12.5 on Albert Stubbins in 1946, which shows you how ridiculous that was. And I think there was a general, even some fans felt that Liverpool, after they'd been relegated, didn't want to go back up again because they were getting bigger gates near the top of Division 2 than they would have got near the bottom of Division 1. Now, whether that's right or not is debatable, but that was the perception amongst fans. They also let Anfield go to rack and ruin, so that when Shanks came, he called it a slum, you know, and there was moss growing on the walls. They had to invest in pipes to flush the toilets even. I mean, that's how bad it was. So clearly the club was on a downturn, big time. And as you say, they escaped in 53, but they didn't in 54, and it wasn't until Shankly arrived that the club was resurrected.
How much of a blow do you think, Frank, it was to the city for Liverpool to be relegated in 54?
It must have been a great blow, because, you know, this is surprising what John's coming out with there, you know, that the board members didn't want to invest, you know, in players. Therefore, they just seemed to be, you know, happy to be languishing, so to speak. And they were big gates. I got a cab here, actually, and I was talking to the taxi driver, and he's an older gentleman, you know, older than me, Matt. And he was saying, when he used to go, you know, to the second division games, that it was phenomenal, because, you know, the crowds that were actually there, and paying good money, by the way. So therefore, this board, you know, with these skinflints, I just don't know. You know, if they can pay like the likes of 14,000 in 1947 for a player, and then, you know, a few years later, you know, pay absolutely, you know, a pittance for players, you know. So therefore, it was the board's fault and not the actual players or the club itself, so to speak. Yet, you know, obviously the fans must have been very, very disappointed, especially looking at Everton, you know, who were in the first division at the time, you know, because they used to poke fun at us, to be honest.
Phyllis said, his wife said earlier, Ian, that he never contemplated leaving Liverpool, even when they dropped down to the second division. That must have been a really tough thing to do, though, because obviously he was an international player, dropping down into what was the second division then. It must have been a tough, sort of lucrative offer to turn down, and a tough decision to make.
Yeah, but that's a gentleman he was, Matt. I mean, he you know, I think he enjoyed living in Liverpool. His family were born in Liverpool, and you know, he wouldn't walk away, Billy, from anything, I don't think. And he wanted to stay and bring the club up again.
And when Liverpool were in the second division, was that when you started going to Anfield yourself, and when you started seeing the man in the flesh?
Yeah, I think I was about 12, 13 when I first went, and say that's what made me a Liverpool supporter, really, because that's the first professional game I saw, and this man who was playing, Billy Liddell, was just awesome, and you know, God, Liddellpool and everything else, and I became, you know, a fan of Billy Liddell's, and God, he was my idol. Yeah, very much so.
And can you remember where the term Liddellpool first came from? Was it a media thing, or was it something within the crowd, or?
Well, I just feel as though he was such a big player, and, you know, I mean, he was the biggest player, and it rhymed, Liddellpool, you know, and I can't remember, you know, as a kid, being called Liddellpool, and just this great man that was there, yeah, fantastic.
I think it was a national newspaper headline that started it. But it was, as Ian said, it lent itself, didn't it? I mean, Liddellpool, you know, people like things that flow, particularly on Merseyside, so it stuck. And but it was accurate, that's the point.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
Because he carried that's why we call the book The Legend Who Carried the Cop. He carried the club, there's no question about that.
Obviously, do you think he was the main reason that Liverpool got such good crowds in that second division?
Yeah, because, you know, again, you know, he could have gone anywhere. You know, there was other clubs, surely, that came in there for him, you know, I'm talking about English clubs, English First Division clubs, and that's where the love affair began with Billy Liddell, because don't forget, this fella was still playing for Scotland. This fella is the only player to be picked for the Great Britain side twice, you know, and if he's being picked for the likes of his home country and the Great Britain side, and he's still playing for Liverpool, and he doesn't want to move, that's where, you know, the fans, the ordinary fans like myself, you know, would, you know, yeah, you know, this is why Liddellpool, and it's a great headline, you know, Liverpool must have won and Billy must have scored a couple or whatever, to call it Liddellpool, because they always look for little quirky headlines, and that's how it stuck, you know. But what an accolade. I think it's absolutely fantastic, and it did, as John said, they like things to flow. You know, even today they like things to flow, and to call that Liddellpool was absolutely amazing, and that's the love affair they have with this great man, this great iconic man who played for us. You know,
it's a very good point Frank makes, Matt, because he got the second. He made his second appearance for Great Britain in 1955 when he was in the second division. So that just shows you what a fantastic player he was. And as Frank said, there's only he and Stanley Matthews played in both the Great Britain teams that have ever played. So you don't need any more confirmation of his greatness than that, I don't think.
People perhaps won't realise these days, John, I mean, we don't have a Great Britain side, it was almost like a select 11, wasn't it, effectively? Yes. How much of an honour was that, though? How big an achievement was it to play for Great Britain twice?
Well, absolutely massive, because they had Great Britain, Scotland then, sadly not now, but Scotland was probably the greatest producer of talent in the world, given the size of their population. Yeah. And the other nations also had great players, England obviously, so to be picked for the only two Great Britain teams ever, and be one of only two who's done it twice, and Stan Matthews the other. Don't forget, Tom Finney didn't get picked, but Billy did. I mean, that is remarkable in itself, because Tom Finney was a legend, and an all-time legend. So, and to be picked for the second one when he was still in the second division, after he'd been left out by Scotland, which, well, only the Scots can answer that, is just incredible. But they recognised how good he was, even though he was playing against the likes of Scunthorpe, you know, in the league, and teams like, not against Scunthorpe. Nothing against Scunthorpe. Nothing at all. But you know, that's how great Billy was.
Do you have a memory of those Great Britain sort of representative
games?
No,
I don't actually, Matt. No, I mean, you know, I know you know, he did play twice, and you know, to be picked for Great Britain, when you think of all the great players, you know, you think about the players who play for Wales, you know, Ivor Allchurch,
John Charles,
you know, and these players, and you know, for Billy, I say, in the second division, still picked. I mean, it's just phenomenal, really.
Yeah, another amazing achievement. Well, while Billy remained a favourite figure on the Kop, up in his native Scotland again, as John was saying, it was a different story, and it wasn't until 48 years after he'd hung up his boots that Liddell was officially recognised for his contribution north of the border. Here's Jake Hargreaves again.
It was here, at the world-famous Hampden Park, back in April 1942, that Billy Liddell made his first senior international appearance for Scotland. The occasion? A wartime international against the old enemy England, and he duly netted in a thrilling 5-4 victory.
The one thing about that game is it's probably tremendously important, because at that time we were actually suffering quite heavy defeats against England in the wartime international matches. So a 5-4 victory at that time would have been very important for Scotland. Good for the morale at that time when we were tending to be in the wrong side of major defeats. So from that perspective, it was an important result for Scotland. My understanding of Billy Liddell as a historian, of course I knew about Billy Liddell, knew about him, he was an important player for Scotland, and he played for Liverpool as well. But it's not until you actually go to Liverpool that you really start to understand his influence. But for any great club, you have to look beyond the success. You've got to look at the club when it struggles. And I think that's the great thing about Liverpool and about their supporters. They remember the great players who played at a time when the club wasn't doing so well. And that's why I think there's a tremendous affiliation for Billy Liddell amongst the Liverpool fans. Liddell seemed to be the one player, really, who kind of held the team together and was an outstanding player of his day.
Billy Liddell's reputation in Scotland did not reflect the immense stature he was held in south of the border, and sadly, his international career suffered as a result. In total, he won just 28 caps, scoring 6 goals.
Williams runs out and intercepts, but he's fumbled it, and the ball's on the ground. Outside left, Liddell sees a chance. It's an open goal, and he shoots. Scotland 3, England 1.
In those days, they looked upon you. If you were a Scotsman and you went to play in England, you were a traitor. And if anyone got criticised by the local press, it was always the Anglo-Scots, never the home Scots.
Could be a suspicion that what was deemed a prejudice against Billy when he was playing, in the sense that the pleas for an all-tartan team at that time had the effect of producing a failure to recognise how much damage he was doing south of the border and how much prestige he was building there.
We always felt that once you go south of the border, the SFA, as it was in Billy's day and my day, I mean, we had a manager, but the manager never picked a team. And in Billy's day, there was no manager. So the SFA picked the team. So therefore, you're going to get, you put anything in the hands of a committee, you're going to get a problem, aren't you?
It's always is a subjective decision at the end of the day. Does someone think you're the right player for the team? And that was obviously something that happened at that time. Could have been down to the fact that it was down in England, and maybe in those days, without the same media involvement, maybe they just weren't getting the notification about what he was achieving in England that turned around in later years when once we started to get a lot more television coverage, newspaper coverage, all that sort of thing. Maybe he just tended to be a little bit forgotten because he was playing in England.
One of Billy's biggest disappointments was that he never got to apply his remarkable talents on the greatest stage of all. In 1950, Scotland narrowly missed out on qualification to the World Cup finals in Brazil. And then in 1954, when Scotland did qualify for the finals in Switzerland, Billy was surprisingly overlooked by the selectors.
It was a shame that he didn't win more caps than what he should have done, but what I will always say about Billy Liddell, and I think this is really important, he's the only Scot that played for Great Britain versus the rest of Europe twice. There's no other Scottish player that has made that achievement. So, beyond the caps that he won for Scotland, that's his accolade. That is an incredible accolade for him to have achieved, and that's what he's remembered for.
Sunday, the 16th of November 2008, and Billy Liddell's contribution to football in his home country has finally been recognised. And after much campaigning, tonight he will be inducted into Scottish football's most prestigious Hall of Fame.
4 years ago we decided to start basically a Hall of Fame for the Scottish football, and that's looking at people who have contributed greatly to the game in Scotland, whether it's as a manager, a coach, a player.
I'm the chairman of the panel, and the first principle is to try to avoid a lynching. I mean, if you're in the business of selecting footballers for the Hall of Fame in Glasgow, then it's a pretty dangerous practice. But no, it's very democratic, obviously. There are a lot of good, healthy arguments from time to time. But in the main, to this point of the Hall of Fame, this is the 5th year, there's been a natural progression. Although it could be said that Billy Liddell perhaps should have been in earlier. That's one of the matters on which a lynching might have been possible if a few Scousers had got involved. And maybe a few Scots up here too.
Now, sadly, the great Billy Liddell passed away in 2001 at the age of 79, but to accept his award, we're delighted to welcome his son, Mal Liddell. Mal, lovely to see you. You must be very proud of your dad.
Very proud indeed. Can I just say a few words? Very few.
Please do.
In the words of Eddie Braben, some of you might know is Morecambe and Wise's scriptwriter and a family friend, he said of my dad that he was a leg end. Certainly was. And it's great that he's been acknowledged as a legend in the Scottish Hall of Fame.
Of course, Peter, you as a Liverpool player, of course, I mean, you would be aware of, I suppose, the legend of Billy Liddell when you were a player.
Definitely. I think they still speak about him now, and they always say he was all-time great, and he's a legend there. So if you're a legend at Liverpool, you're surely one of the best, that's for sure.
Absolutely. We absolutely agree. Mel, lovely to see you. Peter, thanks very much indeed. On behalf of Billy Liddell and the Scottish Football Hall of Fame.
An absolute superb honour, really superb, because, you know, just because of the fact he played all his football in Liverpool, 25 years of it, but he was an immensely proud Scot, and I thought it was a long time coming. The actual presentation or being put to the Hall of Fame.
He should have been in the Hall of Fame, well before, years ago, before any Liverpool player, and I would say that.
It's only a matter of opinion, but you think it might possibly have been done earlier, but I mean, it's the great thing about it is he's in it, well deserved, and a great player for Liverpool and Scotland, of course.
As a modest man, he would have been very touched by the fact that he was actually in this very prestigious Hall of Fame.
Clearly Liddell was a great player. Nobody earns that kind of reputation with Liverpool without being a great player. And I saw him a few times. I didn't see him a lot, but I remember one game particularly. I saw him play for Great Britain against the rest of Europe at Hampden. Mind you, wee bit of a forward line that day. Matthews, Mannion, Lawton, Steele and Liddell. The score was 6-1, and that wasn't any great surprise. But it's perhaps sufficient tribute to Billy to say that he looked entirely justified in that forward line, and indeed in any great forward line in which he figured. Because with that kind of pace and power and the drive of his game, he was a menace to the best defenders around, without question.
Billy Liddell was a tremendous player, a tremendous Scottish player, and it should be in Hampden Park and in the Hall of Fame.
He was a great player, strong, quick, 2 good feet, brave, great, he did everything. As an opponent, he was very difficult to play against. It was like a runaway bull. He was as strong as an ox, never shirked a tackle, and he just did a lot, actually.
Ian, nice to see Billy finally inducted into the Scottish Hall of Fame.
Yeah, as everybody said, it probably should have happened, some years ago, because of Billy's stature. Yeah. So it's just great that he is in the Scottish Hall of Fame.
Certainly is. Time now for our final break. Plenty more Liddell talk to come, and stay tuned for some rare archive footage of the great man in action. Don't go away.
Posh it up this lunchtime with a KFC boneless banquet for one. 3 mini fillets, popcorn chicken, fries, side and drink. With no bones, it's fine food without the fuss.
The sweet trolley.
The KFC boneless banquet for one.
Whatever your thoughts on the latest Liverpool issues, share them on our interactive show, This is Anfield. Whether it be by phone, email, text or Twitter, you could be interacting with Reds legends and having your views heard by fans across the globe. Every week we're joined by a few of the more familiar Copites too, so make sure you get involved. This is Anfield, Monday nights at 9 o'clock, only on LFC TV.
The official LFC mobile site. The latest news, downloads, goals and highlights, competitions and more. For a free link to the site, UK customers text COP to 61718 or 57402 for Ireland.
Because heartburn can strike at any time, keep relief close at hand with Gaviscon liquid sachets.
Go, go, go. This lady needs our help and fast. She's suffering from heartburn and needs Gaviscon. She can feel the cooling and soothing already. Good job, lads.
Gaviscon liquid sachets. For liquid relief you can really feel. And when you're travelling light, here's another handy solution. Best friend. Gaviscon Handy Pack. Feel the relief wherever you go.
For the best interviews and inside exclusives, get the official LFC weekly magazine. There's in-depth analysis of every first-team match, comment and debate from club legends, and news and views from every level at Liverpool Football Club. Test your knowledge with our weekly quiz, and keep your eyes peeled for the Cop Idol hidden on the back cover. LFC is the Premier League's only official weekly magazine, in the shops every Tuesday.
Whether you're from Anfield or Adelaide, Bootle or Bangkok, make www.liverpoolfc.tv your first port of call when you hit the web. With all the Anfield news first, goals and highlights on demand, and the chance to interact with supporters from all over the globe, it's got to be the #1 destination for Reds everywhere. www.liverpoolfc.tv.
Welcome back to the fourth and concluding part of Liddellpool. The gloom of second division mediocrity may have shrouded Anfield by the late 50s, but Billy remained the club's shining light. John, 220-odd, 229 something goals like that in his career. In some respects, though, he's perhaps best known for that goal that never was, wasn't he, against Manchester City in the FA Cup final?
Yeah, I have
FA Cup replay, I should say.
FA Cup replay against Manchester City. It was a Wednesday afternoon. I was there. It was a wintry Wednesday afternoon. Bert Troutman, the great Bert Troutman, in the Manchester City goal, and City are leading, and it's ticked into the 90th minute. Liddell gets the ball on the, as I'm looking at it from the Kop end on my right, on his left-hand side, goes down the wing in his typical red fire engine fashion, cuts in and unleashes the thunderbolt that Troutman never saw, zooms into the Kop net. Kop go wild, everything else. Next thing, everyone's walking off. And the referee had blown, he said, from the time Billy kicked to the ball hitting the net. And they had to actually make a tannoy announcement for people to go home. Nobody was going to leave the ground. And I thought, you know, there could be a revolt here, because I think today that there might well have been, but people were slightly better behaved, I think, then. And they stayed in the ground for ages. They demanding that they have extra time, but the referee had made his decision and that was it. But as you say, he will be remembered for that rather than the 228 he did score, you know.
His career came to an end in the late 50s, early 60s, Frank. No doubt injury sort of played a part in that. Injuries didn't help him in his latter career. The game against Worcester City, though, which is obviously infamous now in Liverpool's history, he missed, and no doubt he's glad about that.
Yeah, because non-league sides, wasn't it? I was, honestly, I always remember, and again, you know, getting the fun poked at us, you know, especially by the other half of the city, the blue half, that is, and we even, you know, that was it that 58 or something like that?
59. January 59.
Never forget that, because we were, you know, we went out of the FA Cup. It was a great giant killing on behalf of Worcester City, and but it was the consequences of that particular defeat, especially for the fans. And I really believe then, you know, after that defeat, Liverpool then, you know, it was a springboard for the likes of Shankly to come in and take over and grab us by the scruff of the neck and bring us to wondrous things as we have today. But yeah, you know, I think that was the demise then of Liverpool. I think that was the lowest of the low, to be beaten by a non-league side as in Worcester City in the FA Cup, because as Ian Callaghan said before, the greatest thing that you could achieve as a player was to play in a FA Cup final. You know, Billy did. Unfortunately, he lost in that final, but to go into a final and win it, you know, that's the only thing that we ever look forward to, you know, was the FA Cup and a good FA Cup run. Because I went to many grounds, you know, as a child, being brought by our Stevie and Ronnie, you know, and I was just made up to go and look at these wonderful games, but it just came to a terrible, tragic end, you know, against Worcester.
Ian, do you think it's fair to say that almost the shock of Billy being dropped was as much as the shock of the result? Because, like you say, he was Liddellpool, wasn't he? So the fact that the manager at the time, Phil Taylor, decided to drop him was unheard of.
Just unbelievable. just unbelievable. And as Frank said, you know, I remember I was an amateur then at Liverpool, and to get beat by Worcester City, you know, and the Evertonians sort of, you know, having a go at you, putting it straight in your face, and so maybe that, I mean, you know, that particular thing, when I think back, and Frank said, well, it was a springboard, you know, Mr. Shankly came in, and so maybe, you know, that result helped me with my career, so I don't know.
Because it was a year later, wasn't it, that you actually replaced Billy and made your debut against Bristol Rovers?
That's right, in the April, 1960.
So did he speak to you? How did he approach that sort of situation where effectively he was almost being replaced by an 18-year-old?
You know, thinking about it, really, I mean, as an 18-year-old, I mean, I must admit, you know, I mean, although he was my idol, I think I was, you know, sort of that frightened on my debut and everything else. I didn't give it any thought. All I was thinking about was getting out on the pitch and playing well. But it wasn't, you know, long afterwards when I think about my debut, and you know, a couple of scrapbooks my mum used to keep, and I read about my debut, taking over from the great man, you know, the great Billy Liddell. I mean, God, I should have been frightened to death. I should have been promised, but I wasn't.
But he didn't speak to you directly about anything. He was still a perfect gentleman. As
I mean, afterwards, you know, on the training ground, he'd speak to me, and because, you know, I mean, he saw me as a youngster coming through, a local lad, and you know, Billy was always, you know, although he was a quiet man, you know, he'd always come across and he'd always have a word with you, encouragement, and. You know, and I just think, oh God, the great man, you know, was speaking to me. I'm getting, you know, sort of ready for training next to him in the dressing room and all this. And, you know, I used to look across and think, oh, that's Billy Liddell. Wonderful.
It must have been an absolute dream to play with what was effectively your idol, wasn't it?
Well, it was, as I say, you know, I mean, I only played in the reserves with him, but, you know, I mean, it's one of the proudest moments of my life, you know, to say, well, Ian Callaghan took over from Billy Liddell, you know, which was absolutely, you know, even today, you know, I quite like to hear that, you know, when I think of the player Billy was and the way people, you know, how they hold him in, you know, high esteem, and and I took over from him,
Okay, well, all good things must come to an end, and on August the 31st, 1960, Billy Liddell donned the red shirt for the final time. It was a sad day all round. The Reds lost 1-0 at home to Southampton, but to his adoring fans, the memories of his heyday will never fade.
To the old Liverpool fans, Liddell was the player. Greatest.
Wainwright's hasty clearance goes to Liddell, and Billy makes certain that it'll be an all-red Wembley final.
Billy Liddell was the greatest all-round player that I ever saw. He had everything. He had pace, power, left foot, right foot, heading ability. Wonderful, wonderful player.
Billy Liddell is often considered to be one of the greatest players who ever was on the books of Liverpool Football Club. But we have to sort of temper that with the realisation that, in fact, Billy Liddell's career should have started in 1938, and certainly by the summer of 1939, but actually was put on hold till 1945-46. Now, just imagine how good his career would have been if we could have really seen Billy Liddell play probably his best years of his life in full league competitive football.
He was invaluable to Liverpool, you know. Fellas with speed, direct running at them, you know, at the fullback. So the fullback didn't know which way Billy would go. Would he go left or right? And he was so fast, he could pick up speed quickly. And he was very courageous. And also, he had a deadly shot in both feet. Left or right, didn't matter which one, Billy could hit the ball.
Anybody of my vintage would know about Liddell, how much Liddell meant to the football club. They'd say, you never lace Liddell's boots, and you go, yeah, I know that, you know. I know what he's done for the club.
He played in virtually every position for Liverpool. I mean, he was an immense talent. I watched them when they were in the second division, and it was though he was sort of carrying the team most of the time, you know.
Billy Liddell actually started to become like the talisman of the club. Never mind the liver bird, never mind You Never Walk Alone that we have these days. It was Liddellpool. The team was even named after him, probably with good reason. You just looked at some of the frankly underwhelming players that he was often surrounded with, and there was this shining star, this awesome footballer, this player who was rated so highly.
He's the only bloke in football, I've said this many times, who's never swore, he's never had a drink, and he's always looked after himself.
He was a tremendous man and so respected by everybody. I mean, I know, quite a lot of footballers and quite a lot of the old footballers, and everybody spoke glowingly about Billy Liddell.
Dewey Little interview people, the media, they'd say Billy would go down, I'd go down the line and cross the ball and Billy would head it in, and it would say in the paper on the Sunday, a bullet-like header from Billy Liddell. The following week, he went down the line, and I knocked it in, and did say, a well-placed centre by Billy Liddell.
Liddell, who was a classic winger, but a very, very good goal-scoring winger. In fact, he was a stunning goal-scorer.
When the second division team put Everton 1 down with a goal by Billy Liddell.
Years of service he rendered, He was, and the consistency of the player. I don't think any player's ever been more consistent. Like in a player's career, very often there's one season, which is a bad one, But I can't remember any bad seasons for Billy.
And I've been lucky enough to watch Liverpool from 49 right through to the modern era, and I've seen all the greats. And Billy never had these European Cup winners' medals or championship medals galore, but there's not one side since the 60s, since the great Bill Shankly took over the club, that Liddell would not have walked in. He was magnificent.
Bob Paisley, who loved Billy, he would say he was the greatest player in his eyes, and he's seen them all. So we were brought up on that Billy was the greatest ever Liverpool player. So, it's a great accolade, isn't it?
You can talk about Alex Racebeck, you can talk about Elijah Scott, you can talk about Kenny Dalglish. You go into our museum and there's a whole wall dedicated to King Billy, the greatest player who ever played for Liverpool Football Club.
He was immense. We're all so proud of him. I can still feel myself getting nervous talking about him.
There's only one, Billy Liddell, and love the bones of him.
His legacy is not one of a cabinet full of glittering medals, and the one medal is actually very tiny. It's what he represented, it was his attitude, it was the fact that the team was actually unofficially named after him. What footballer since has ever had that?
Frankie had an amazing career. I suppose the only slight shame is that he didn't coincide with when Mr Shankly came in and revolutionised the club. If he'd have been in that side, who knows what could have happened.
Absolutely, and it is a great shame that, he wasn't at his peak when the great man came, because he would have won a lot more, and that's the unfortunate thing about his career. But, I'll just leave by saying, Billy Liddell, Liddellpool, and I don't think he could be more, as a fan here, more proud by saying, Billy Liddell and Liddellpool, and he should, his family should take that with a great pride, Liddellpool, that's it.
He would have quite comfortably got into those teams that were so successful in the 60s and the 70s and indeed the 80s, wouldn't he?
I would think he'd walk into any Liverpool team without a single doubt. I mean, it's just a fantastic privilege for me to have known the man, to take over from the man, and, he's just an iconic figure, and as some of the lads have said, probably the best player that's ever played for Liverpool.
Some people would say the greatest, John. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would quote Tommy Lawrence. We talked about him earlier, the goalkeeper, Shanks' goalkeeper. We were talking about Dalglish and Liddell, who I guess would be most people's final two, if you're talking about the greats. And he said, Kenny Dalglish was a fantastic player in a fantastic team. Billy Liddell was a fantastic player in a largely mediocre team. So you can guess which way Tommy's going on that, and I would go that way too. I think today he'd be beyond price. He's a fantastic player, he was a fantastic man, and Liverpool were blessed to have had him wearing their jersey.
A good place to finish. Boys, thanks very much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure hearing all your thoughts today. Sadly, the great Billy Liddell is no longer with us. He passed away in July 2001. But visit Anfield on a quiet day and old-timers will swear they can still hear the once famous roar, "I'd give it to Billy," ringing around the Kop. Gone, but never forgotten. Billy Liddell, we salute you. Goodbye.